welcome to the Awakening Philosophy podcast. My name is Jed. Welcome to everybody joining in chat. We are today reading the Meno. Hooray! Last time we began, this is our second episode on the Meno. Very exciting stuff. Last time we discussed, we asked some big questions. Why are we reading the Meno? How are we reading the Meno? And those two. So why are we reading the Meno? Well, in our channel, we've been reading, so far we've gotten into the beginning of the Parmenides. We are reading the Philosophical Midwifery book. One, to discover the logos of what leads us to our highest goals. The other, discovering the logos or the system of reasoning or the understanding or the model. All of these words apply to the idea of logos. And of course, that's what we are discovering, the logos. So we don't need a complete answer, but we have something we're working with as we discover what exactly the logos is. So the logos apply to our excellence and the logos applied to our problems. We're also reading the sense of music at the moment. So discovering how the logos is reflected into our physical world of becoming by picking up a quest to understand a particular system of understanding that we can explore. There are many, of course. Music happens to be one of them, and music is also a lot of fun. So we're on the hunt for the logos. But as we do so, a question has come up in chat. What does it mean to be a philosopher? What does it mean to do these things well, to go on this discovery well, to live a life in a good kind of a way? Another way of asking that question is, what is virtue? So we're taking a deviation from the Phaedo to jump into the Meno, because the first sentence of the Meno is specifically this question. First of all, the question is, can virtue be taught? So the question, how do we do these things we're doing together in the best kind of way? And last time we discovered another word for virtue is excellence. And we've also been discovering that to be in the game of philosophy, we have to ourselves be seeking excellence. We have a little diagram of what it means to be a philosopher, discovering questions, carrying them with us in our inventory, discovering hypotheses, carrying our hypotheses with us, or creating hypotheses. As we read, we look for key terms, we look for puzzles, we look to become puzzled ourselves. One of the key words we talk about when we are wanting to understand what it means to be in the game of philosophy is excellence. If we ain't seeking excellence, we can settle. We can settle for not quite reaching the truth, for not quite answering the questions that we want to answer, for not quite reaching our highest goal. This is a problem in philosophy, of course, because if one of your questions is, well, what is the meaning of life? You could start a little bit of a quest, and then someone could come along and they can make an attractive argument like, oh, it's just about belief. Or their answer to the meaning of life could be presented as a belief. And someone could say, oh yeah, I'm happy enough to go along with the crowd, go along with the many, as Socrates says, and just accept their belief. This won't reach truth, however. And one of the things we're discovering is moving through the cognitive functions from image thinking and beliefs to understanding. We want to understand why we're here and what we should be doing. Also, we would like very much to verify our understanding in direct experience. So, as we are learning the logos, we are recognizing that the logos can also be applied to cognitive functions or ways of thinking, understanding, knowledge, belief. So, we don't want to settle. Equally so in philosophical midwifery. as we learn the logos and apply it to discovering and removing ourselves from the binds or the chains of our problems, we might realize we're able to reach certain goals we haven't been able to before. Goals that maybe are focused around our career or our relationships. I can now do the public speaking I never was able to do, or I now have the confidence to ask for that raise, or anything like that. And then we might dip out. That's enough philosophical midwifery for me. I'm out of here to go get that raise and that manager position where I can talk in public. That might be a problem, because we might not, if we settle or don't reach for an even higher goal, there might be some other fundamental, unsuspected false beliefs causing problems that will remain and influence us negatively, block us in other areas, manifests in other ways, nightmares, illnesses. Maybe you'll be a manager, but a crummy manager. And of course, as we're discovering in the photo, it might also affect our reincarnation. If you don't really do your job here, you might have to come back until you do. And of course, there might be other higher spiritual goals that you'll miss out on while you're here. And if you're willing to settle, or rather you're not seeking excellence, you may fail to learn the art of midwifery itself, pass on the tradition, or you may fail to reflect on what you've been through and recognize, hang on a second, if philosophical midwifery is so significant, is so healing, has affected my life so positively, has given so much benefit, it might be itself worth understanding, not only as a participant, as a pregnant party, but as a midwife yourself. It might be worth learning. Of course, if you're happy to settle, then you'll miss out on all that, and maybe miss out on the whole reason for doing it to begin with. So these are lots of reasons that we have discovered already for pursuing excellence to be in the game. Pursuing excellence in what we do. And as we read in the Philosophical Midwifery book, hey, you can surface clues about your blocks when you pursue excellence, even in doing mundane things. So I've been talking a lot about excellence, and of course, excellence can be applied to us ourselves as human beings or as souls. What is the excellence or the ideal or the best way of being for a human being? Last time in our reading of the Meno, we discovered that the word virtue can be replaced with excellence. So when we say, what does it mean to be virtuous? Or, in the Meno, can virtue be taught? We're really asking, what does it mean to be in the excellence of a human being? What is our ideal state? What is the best we can do? What's the best way of being? And of course, this may bring in other puzzles and questions for you. Maybe you're familiar with sports and you realize, well, hang on a second. The other day when Steph Curry was in the last 2 minutes of the Olympics, he got into a state where he couldn't miss. Would that be related to the excellence? Because he certainly was in the excellence of being a basketball player, as much as any other basketball player has been. Is this related to our ideal state? Being on fire, they call it in basketball. What about your own high states of mind? Sometimes you might have felt inspired or in a flow state. Dancing, singing, meditating. Is this related to excellence? What is the excellence? And of course, when we pursue the goals that we are pursuing in our channel, discovering and mastering the art of the logos, in the various texts that we're in the various ways that we can apply the logos, the various areas we can look to discover the logos. When we seek to master it, is that a level of excellence applied to philosophy, applied to midwifery, applied to music? And as we do that, should we be in a certain ideal state? And if we are, would we gain the most benefit? Will we not play basketball the best we can, but would we be able to read the best we can, do philosophy the best we can, learn music the best we can? So as we go, the question of what is virtue or what is excellence is a big one for us. And if we don't have it, how do we get it? I don't think we're born perfect, or rather, okay, maybe perfect isn't the right word, because there is a kind of way in which we're perfect no matter what we are or when we are. But we're here to learn. So how do we learn how to get into that flow state? Not every rookie basketball player is at Stephen Curry's level. Let's use that as an example. We're not all of us enlightened yet. So how do we get enlightened? How do we get into that state of excellence? These are the questions we're bringing with us into the Meno, and the reason why we're in the Meno to begin with. What exactly is our excellence or virtue? Or rather, the question that Meno is asking Socrates is, can it be taught? How do we get it? How do we get virtue? Says Meno to Socrates. So that's the question where, the main question, the main storyline of this text that we're reading. And of course, there are many other ones that we're taking with us. What exactly is this logos? What is the dialectic? So this is our other question. How are we reading? Well, we know that there is the main story, the main narrative, that anybody reading the text will be able to follow. But also there's a deeper level of reading that Socrates has told us to do as we read from the Phaedo. Look for the dialectic. See if you can discover the dialectic in the arguments. See if you can discover how the dialectic is being used in the conversation itself. See if you can discover the dialectic in Socrates' way of thinking. So all of this is a way of reading where we raise our minds to the level of the author. So we're not interpreting. We're not adding things that we're carrying with us into the text that aren't there. Equally so, we're not leaving out what is there. We're reading exactly what's there, which is an activity, which is itself a kind of exercise or yoga. To see exactly what is without interpretation. Another way of phrasing that is bringing our minds to match the level of mind of the author, which will include his vision. So bringing our minds to see the vision that Socrates has. And of course, his understanding. How does he understand his vision? Many people have had visions, high visions, insights, enlightenment experiences, drug experiences, meditation experiences. But how many of them have been able to understand it properly and communicate it? This is exactly a question that Socrates asked in the Phaedo. How many people have not only had a vision, but been able to give the logos of it? Talk about it, explain it. And we would add, from our understanding of the dialectic, communicate it in an artful way to benefit others, the way Socrates does in his dialogues. So his vision and his understanding, or his mastery of it, which is one of our other questions. What is mastery? Well, it's got to have something to do with being able to understand it, talk about it, share it, benefit other people with it. And of course, we have that other question we're carrying. We have a lot of questions, by the way, a whole sack full that we carry with us. What does it mean to benefit? What is art? And how is benefit related to art? Lots of questions like these. So by reading what's there in a certain kind of way, without interpreting and with the dialectic, we're raising our minds to meet the vision and the understanding of Socrates. And if Socrates is himself at a certain level of enlightenment or a dimension or state of being, or maybe even a certain state of excellence or virtue, then by reading in this kind of a way, we are bringing our state of being to match his, which is exciting.
Wow.
So that's why we're reading and how we're reading. So with these things under our belts, bunch of questions, a strategy for moving forward, a reason for being here, let's jump into the text and keep reading together. Here we are. And we have a title screen. The Meno, Can Virtue Be Taught? So, part of the logos is, learning what the logos is will involve learning its structure. As is the dialectic, there's a certain structure in the dialectic that we are looking for and using. And part of that structure involves what begins. Part of a structure is the beginning of something. How does our text therefore begin? Meno begins. Can you tell me, Socrates, whether virtue is teachable? This is our, what's going on here? Okay. Is virtue straight away, can we see any puzzles with us in the first sentence itself? Because as we read, we might make connections, gain new understanding, gain new insights, and maybe it should refer back to the opening sentence or the opening of the text. In fact, here is our chalkboard here. We talked about last time the 2 levels of reading. Love of learning, which was to do with trusting that this is worth doing, trusting the logos and repeating it. By the way, to repeat it, it helps if you understand the structure of it. Just like it's difficult, it would be difficult to memorize a whole song, which you have to remember and repeat, if you didn't realize that there is a verse, chorus, bridge structure that's repeated. You know how one flows into the other. You know that the chorus is repeated. You know that the verses has a certain rhyming scheme. So these are all mnemonic devices, or a better way of saying it, ways of understanding the structure of the whole that allows you to see it and remember it and use it. In a similar way that even our first level of reading, trust and repetition, would benefit by seeing the structure of the whole thing. So we're looking for the structure. Our second level of reading, according to Socrates, is from philomathesis, love of learning, to philosophia, or philodianoia, philosophy. What's philosophy? Applying the dialectic. That's the study of, or the exercise of philosophy. As Socrates and his teacher Parmenides says, the many call useless or empty talk, but really it's the highest exercise, the self-exercise of philosophy. Applying the dialectic. Last time we talked about the structure of the dialectic. And the first category is definition at the beginning. So taking that with us. Oh, and the last thing is synthesis analysis. Tying our conclusions after having gone through the whole thing back to the opening, which does what? It allows us to see the opening in a new way that we didn't do didn't see before.
Wow. Wow. Wow.
So with that in mind, we are in the text, seeing the opening of the text, and we need to pull out a bunch of questions so we can remember it, and so we can be in a kind of open, curious state of mind, and so we can have some things that will pay off at the end. How many questions can we see in the opening that at the end of the text we might be able to answer or even see in a new way? Meno is starting. Is that significant? Who's leading? He starts with a question. Is that significant? Can you tell me, Socrates, whether virtue is teachable? There's two parts to that, isn't there? There's the first part, whether virtue is teachable or not. And then the answer to that question, can it be taught? Not only the truth about the question, but can it be communicated by someone else? What's the question? This thing called virtue, can it be communicated or passed on or taught? And that whole thing is doubled up by him asking the answer to this question, can you teach it to me? Can you tell me? Can you communicate it to me? Is that significant? Can we see the dialectic in the first sentence? Well, maybe is virtue teachable is the definition of his question, maybe the whole text, and the demonstration is, can you demonstrate it by telling me the answer? By the way, if virtue is excellence and there is an answer to this question, would Socrates really be excellent himself if he simply told him? Or is there more to it? Does teaching involve more than just telling someone the answer? If so, can you tell me is not only a demonstration of the first question, but maybe holds a different meaning. Can you demonstrate the answer? What answer? Is excellence teachable? Can you answer it, and can you demonstrate it to me? So maybe we can see the dialectic, definition and demonstration, two big ones, or the first two, even in the opening sentence. Can you teach excellence to another person? And the answer to that question, can you tell it to me? Is that teaching? Well, we know already, or we have an idea already, that there are at least these two kinds of learning, of reading. You have to trust in the logos and remember it and repeat it. Tell it to your friends over coffee. Cheers. Oh, I'm spilling coffee everywhere. Hot. Ouch. And the second level of learning is to actually do it yourself. And so as we read each text, we have a document open where we, when we notice that there's a theme or a topic being talked about, we pull out everything we learn, we put it into a dialectic to do it ourselves. We are engaged. We are the players. So that's involved in learning. Or teach, and facilitating that would therefore be involved in teaching. So there's another puzzle that we can bring to this opening sentence. Okay, and then there's this weird opening where Socrates doesn't answer directly, but gives us a big backstory about where this guy's from, who his lover is, who his teacher is probably going to be, the people, his society. Hey, the Thessalians fell in love with the wisdom of Gorgias. And I bet that's where you learnt what virtue is. And also your lover played a role. And I bet you're in the habit. Is habit interesting? Is that an art? Or is it just automatic habit? of answering in a certain way, grandiose, fearlessly. Every preacher and evangelist and politician have that way of talking, don't they? Even though they're all they can't all be right. If anything, only one of them can be right, because all of their opinions are different, because they're just talking about their personal opinions. Sometimes it's linked to a holy book or a tradition or a culture or a family, political family, a religious tradition. And of course, there are hundreds, if not thousands of different ones. So and they all contradict each other. So even though they have a grand and fearless style, at least 99% of them are wrong. Even if they manage to convince the people in their community or church or whatever to believe them. There's a certain style of answering questions that he is guessing may apply, or predicting, or what's another word for predicting? Prophesizing? Is that word significant in philosophy? It was mentioned in the Phaedo. Prophesizing how he understands answering questions, which is tied to virtue, excellence, or wisdom. If you have wisdom, then you're probably going to have to use it by answering questions. And answering all sorts of people on any subject they choose. No one goes unanswered. Just curious, because we know already we've got a bunch of unanswered questions. We just did a whole big introduction today of all the questions that we are carrying that we don't know the answers to. Even big ones like Logos. We are trusting the Logos. We are discovering it in solving problems in midwifery, in understanding truth and reality in philosophy, in understanding music. We're doing those things whilst looking for the Logos. Do we have an answer? I don't know. But we've got a big question, big, fat, juicy question. What is the Logos? Socrates is predicting something different for our friend Meno. Athens is different. Athens is in the opposite way, and Socrates is calling it a dry spell. Is that related to truth? Would the Athenians be more wise than the, who are they? The Thessalians? And the Larissanians, his companion Aristippus? So lots of different communities. And we also know from the Phaedo that Socrates is not just talking about something, he mythologizes it. He gives a narrative, he gives a story. So each of these places might represent a certain way of being, or a certain approach to virtue, or a certain idea of wisdom. I don't know yet, but there's something there. Val's question of by any Hellene who, and by the way, this whole area is the Hellenic area. Any Hellene asks anything, they will never go unanswered. So what I thought was Athens is in a dry spell of wisdom because it has moved from this place to yours. So Athens used to maybe be this way, but has changed in some way. Why would Athens have changed? Is it bad? Are they really in a certain dry spell? Dry spell of what? Why would Athens used to be one way, the home of Socrates, but now be another way? These are questions we're bringing in. Excellent. I dare say that I am blessed so as to be able to say whether excellence can be taught, or in what way it comes to be known. How do we come to know the ideal of why we're here, of what it means to be a man or human? Man is genderless, of course. A human being. So yeah, that's the way that we use the word man when we talk in philosophy, because Socrates makes it very clear that anyone can do it. That's one of the amazing things about philosophy. You don't have to be a certain gender or race or even species. If it's truth, it's truth. Everyone can play. No need for the kinds of divisions that cause suffering, like sexism, racism, nationalism, all these negative things. Speciesism, even. Yeah, anyone can play. It's a way of uniting humanity under understanding. Another good reason to call philosophy philodainoia, the love of understanding. Neither do I happen to know what in. So Socrates says, I am still in need of knowing this, whether excellence is teachable or not, and neither do I happen to know what in the world it is. What is self-excellence? This is really good because it also gave us an introduction to a key word. We've talked last time about questions and how there are levels. And we used a metaphor for filmmakers. Often there's the obvious narrative that anybody, even your grandma coming to see a movie, let's use Inception, and they understand the main theory. Basically, Inception, Leonardo DiCaprio has to incept an idea into the mind of somebody through their dreams, but the businessman who he's incepting doesn't know he's dreaming. So that's the main level. And then at the end, there's a good filmmaker will have a twist, ask a question. Could it be not that this businessman is dreaming, but Leonardo DiCaprio, the hero of the story, the main character? Could the main character be dreaming? And then you've got to go back and read it a second time, which is interesting because we've talked about how there is a first level of reading, trusting the logos and remembering it, repeating it, having coffee with your friends, make sure you don't spill. It's a bit hot. And then at the end, you realize, hang on a second, there's a twist. We've got to go back and read it a second time, as we discovered in the Phaedo. We're trying to kill two birds with one stone and try and do the dialectic as we go. So that's pretty cool. So we have to go back and watch Inception or Memento or whatever, a Christopher Nolan movie or Fight Club. There are some film directors who are good at it. Second level of question. And then there's a third. The thing about the third is that question. Okay, so while the first, let's draw a picture to get this clear. This is a theory, by the way. A film theory.
Wow.
So we have the first level of questions and in a text which is the obvious story. What is the main question of the protagonist that everyone can see? And this, you are usually given the question and at the end, the answer. Otherwise, people walk out of the film, your grandma or your unreflective friend that you go to the movie with, and he didn't get an answer, and he'll go, that movie stunk, and it will fail at the box office. No one will watch the movie, and the director won't get any more work, and whatever other questions are hidden within his art will be missed because no one's going to see it if there is a question or a problem that has to be solved and it isn't paid off at the end of the film. So you're given the question and the answer. Now, there's usually a second level of question. Let's say in film as our analogy. So sometimes this is called the twist, which would require a rereading. May require a rewatch or rereading in our case, because Socrates lived at the time before cinemas. Even though this podcast is set on an ancient Greek beach, as you can see the lovely background, and you see the ancient Greek buildings in the background of the beach. And I happen to be able to talk to you from 500 BC, where this dialogue actually happened and was recorded because of projector technology. But Socrates was walking along the beach in the background and he didn't see it, so he doesn't know about projectors and movies. So they just had books or stories. So we say rewatch or reread. Now, sometimes a director or artist will, so often the twist is at the end, but so let's keep that back. Let's undo that. So let's give an example. Twist is at the end. Twist at the end, like an example of that would be M. Night Shyamalan. Okay. Shyamalan. His films often have the twist at the end, but the twist or it can be, or second question can be built or given throughout. Like Christopher Nolan. I think a lot of people in watching Inception can start to notice some clues that give that second level of question. And of course, some people have the idea if you just keep putting it at the end, that might become a bit hacky. Maybe there's some art involved in how you sprinkle in the ideas of the second question. And some people might say, well, that's M. Night Shyamalan not moving into a more artful way of inputting a second question might be the cause of the problems that he had being able to recreate the success of his earlier films. I don't know. These are questions. Maybe you're a filmmaker, or maybe you want to be one. Hopefully something like this is interesting for you. Now, we have the, whoops. So in here we are given the question, not given the answer. So that twist at the end is not answered, at least in the first reading. Okay, so why stop there? This is another part of being a philosopher. When you see a pattern, that's part of what we're looking for. Let's go put that in it's our picture. This is us. What do we also do? We look for key terms and relationships, which is sometimes called patterns. And other words would be symmetry. Symmetry, look for symmetry, which is a kind of pattern. Is there a symmetry in the text? Is there an order in the text? Patterns. And we also push the implications, or apply those patterns. If you notice a pattern, push it, apply it somewhere else. Hey, if you saw it here, can you see it here? Which is the principle behind our skill trees. Hey, if you notice a triad in terms of the virtues, or a triad in terms of one thing, a triad of 3 terms in a certain relationship, maybe these two at one level leading to this at the top, and you see a triad over here, can you apply that pattern, what you saw here, can you apply it to a new thing to gain insight? That's analogy. That's also the principle behind analogy. You can see a pattern of how all shepherds relate to sheep. Can you apply it to how kings relate to people? Or in philosophy, you see a pattern in many beautiful things leading to the question, what is beauty itself? Now you're in the game of philosophy, now you're into metaphysics, not in the adjectives in our physical world of change and becoming, but the self beauty in the realm of being, which is eternal and immortal. Now we're in what we call metaphysics, or before physics, before the physical world. Can you apply it to something else? Maybe you see many examples of something else. Adjectives. Hey, this text, many virtuous people, or people in a state of excellence in your life. Maybe they're role models for you. Maybe you want to ask the question, hey, what is the self-virtue or excellence? Because I want to have that from these role models that I have. So, this is the idea of analogy. It's the idea behind our skill trees. What is it? Look for a pattern and push the implications, or apply those patterns. So we're learning what it means to read and be a philosopher. So that's our guy here.
I'm looking for someone to share in and...
You're a wizard, Harry.
You're a wizard, Harry. So, hey, if it's working, if an average film just has the average story, a boring rom-com maybe, but the more interesting, the films that you remember, the films that are seen as classics or are more lasting or stay in your mind, stay in the public sphere, often have a second level of question, which is often a twist at the end, gets people thinking, gets people to rewatch it, like M. Night Shyamalan or Christopher Nolan, who puts it more artfully, where you're given the question, but you're not given the answer. So let's keep going. So we're given the question and answer on the first level. We get rid of one for the next level. Let's push the implication and look for let's zoom in a little bit. Third level of question. What would that be? Well, let's push the pattern. Theoretically, as a hypothesis that we're carrying in our hypothesis sack, where's our mate? Here he is. Our hypothesis sack of ifs, that's us.
You're a wizard, Harry.
We are not given the question, nor the answer. So we have to ourselves give birth to or discover the question at a third level. And what's really curious is this way of thinking is built into the ancient Greek language, because the word self is one of our triads. Here we are. So have this in our triad inventory or skill tree. The particular is it. So the subject of the sentence, you can replace the word self with it and read it that way. By the way, this has been the only way self or autos has been translated up until the last decade. Thankfully, we have the Balboa translation. A free link to the text is below. So we've missed out on all of those levels of reading. We've been reading Socrates, probably the most profound artist, creator, human being, philosopher ever to walk the planet. We've been reading him the same way your grandma watches Inception, watches Memento, or watches a rom-com even. We've been treating it like it's a simple start to finish rom-com. So simple, here's a question: can she marry the man of her dreams who is visiting for Christmas while she works at the local bookstore? Or will they not find love before he has to go back to his $1 million corporate job in the big city? And at the end, he either finds that her love is more important than that and stays and becomes co-owner of the bookstore and they get married, or they don't. And of course, they always do, because you would be sad if they didn't. So that's the way we've been treating Socrates, even by experts in the field up until now. But we can say boo to that. But thankfully for us, we can unlock a new way of reading. The same way we read like important films or interesting anime, or like there's a whole division of social media, of YouTube, directed towards film theories and game theories and anime theories. It's a huge ecosystem. People looking for the different levels of depth of meaning and doing video essays or fan theories about it. That's a whole ecosystem. It's huge. Like, go down the rabbit hole for Inception or for Fight Club or for, I don't know, Hunter x Hunter, whatever you're into. So if we can apply it to things like that, written by mere mortals, why don't we do it to Socrates, who has maybe the highest excellence of a human being? Well, we can now, because we actually have the original material. We don't have the poor English dub translation where all of the key points are removed, so it can be safe to show on Disney Channel or something like that. That's a strange analogy, but you get what I mean. Why don't we apply that same level of mind, integrity, maybe virtue to reading Socrates the way we might get into an anime or a great film like that with a mystery? Could that be part of virtue? Add that to our question sack. Where's our question sack? So that's our question sack. Oof. Look at that art. Look at that art. That's a sack, by the way. That gets carried in our inventory. So is that a level of virtue? So that's an interesting pattern we have developed, as we discover what it would mean to read well, can we create a hypothesis of how that might relate to the question of the text? Excellence. Is this level of relating to anything, particularly things that reflect the logos, is that a level of excellence? Would you be reading less excellently if you didn't? And of course, that's the dialectic. Not just part A, what it is, but part B. Do both. So maybe this question, is this kind of reading where we apply this level of integrity we do for Inception to Socrates, who's even greater probably than Christopher Nolan? Is that integrity? That might be hard to answer if this hypothesis is part A of a dialectic. This is a dialectic. But if we apply it to part B, it might shed light on what we can't see. It's kind of like an analogy. So let's ask that question. If we didn't read a text, or if we didn't, okay, let's use the analogy. If we didn't reflect on Inception, wondering about the second level of question, would we be watching with less excellence? Well, that's pretty obvious. Well, yeah, of course we would. That's our grandma watching Inception. Oh, that was a fine movie. I'm glad he found his family at the end. Spoilers, sorry, if you haven't seen Inception. Not really excellence. The people who do those video essays on the hidden meaning of Inception, that's more level of virtue, excellence applied to Inception, right? Same too with our reading. So while it was difficult to see here, it was a little bit more clear here. This is one reason why doing the dialectic involves two. What if it is and what if it isn't? And there are only 4 categories that you apply to both. So, cool. And our discovery of that, one of the questions we have is, how do we read? Maybe we can take that as a hypothesis. Maybe this also applies to virtue. Make that a hypothesis. If, what's our subject? The virtue of reading, or the excellence of reading, also applies to the excellence of being a human, what would follow? Hard to say, but let's take the other one. What if we didn't? What if the excellence of a human being does not necessarily include the excellence of reading? Would that be an excellent human? Or could we come along and say, oh, that's a pretty good human, but he could actually be reading better? Let's say, what isn't the excellence of reading? Well, thankfully, we've talked about that already today. What do we call it? Interpretation. If we read to raise our mind to the level of Socrates, his vision and understanding, the opposite is not. Project whatever beliefs you already carry onto the text, which is how we're taught to read at school. What does To Kill a Mockingbird mean to you? And you can spew out any garbage that you're already carrying in your mind. Who cares? There's no paradigm of truth. It's whatever opinion you like, which might be why it's appealing for Meno or for his teacher to teach him, hey, just answer any question in a fearless and grand style. Because how else can you determine whether or not it's true? How else can you determine whether or not To Kill a Mockingbird is really about Jesus loving you? Be confident with it, right? Isn't that what every salesman is taught? Isn't one of the biggest departments at any university marketing? Isn't that what they teach? There is no actual truth or virtue of what you should be doing. So just find a way of presenting your answer in a fearless and grand style so people believe you. Where else do you see that way of functioning? People selling a product or a belief or an idea without any standard of objective, universal, knowable, intelligible truth, or logos for the word that means all of those things. See, we're applying it to our everyday world and our own selves to bring it to life. This is another triad in philosophy that we can add. Bringing it to life, because we don't read philosophy as an academic exercise or a logical exercise, as some people who've completely grandmas at the film, we'll call them grandmas at the cinema. Some of those grandmas at the cinema who claim to be experts in philosophy will say, oh, Socrates is just a logical exercise, which is of course insane, because why would Socrates spend his time doing that? But we can say Apollo, which is reading the logos or philosophy, and we have this is mythologized with the god Apollo, and that was important in our reading of the Phaedo because it was the god of Apollo that the whole thing was directed to. And we have Aphrodite with them big old ditties. Oh, that was a bad joke. Aphrodite, who the joke was famous because she's the goddess of beauty. So she would be drawn very beautifully with long flowing hair in her dress. See, there was a reason for that attempt at humor. And it was also very funny. No, whoops.
Wow.
That's one for the blooper reel.
Very funny, I say. Anyway, Aphrodite is the goddess of beauty, which is used to represent the idea of meaningful connections or parts coming together. As wholes. Now these two, you need both. It's not just Apollo, a dry, dusty, boring academic logical exercise like it's taught in schools. And it's not just applying nothing to your world, looking for meaning where it isn't. Maybe you have some friends who are in that level of Aphrodite, trying to see meaningful holes in their world, looking for coincidences or serendipities or something like that. And they'll be, oh, I looked at a clock and it said 3:33. And I remember seeing a clock like that yesterday. So maybe that's a meaning. Or maybe, but what meaning? Oh, often they will just use these things to reflect what they already believe. Oh, that tells me Jesus is in my heart or something. Well, you already thought that. What are you learning? And how is that inherent in this particular coincidence? In other words, what is the logos that coincidence is supposedly reflecting? It isn't. It's not a logos. It's your own belief. There's nothing inherent in threes that would make it more Jesus than Mormonism or Islam or Jewishness or even philosophy. Hey, we're doing a three right here. Triad. So you need both together. And they come together if we're doing both, if we're reading the text with a certain level of excellence of Apollo, because we are wondering what's the excellence of reading. And we're also making meaningful connections, applying it to ourselves, our world, our problems, our most meaningful goals. That's Aphrodite. We're seeing how these parts that we pull out, the questions that we pull out, how can they come together into hypotheses or answers? Now, we call answers hypotheses at the level of understanding because the whole point of understanding is to awaken us to an even higher cognitive level where we directly experience it. That's called nous, a word that ain't in our English language, which might be one of the reasons why we have the problems we have. And one of the reasons why we read Socrates like our grandma watches Inception. Socrates specifically says the whole point of reading in this kind of a way is to awaken a higher sense of cognitive function where you're at a higher dimension, fourth dimension, where you can see mind as a whole, separating the soul from the body, as it says in the Phaedo. So everything is just a hypothesis until we know, and that's what knowing is. And so we need the word nous because the word knowing doesn't really mean that in our English language. So this activity of looking for meaningful logos that reflects the highest reality. So we're understanding and thinking in the right way, we're looking in the right direction, and the act of putting it together into a whole, putting the parts into a whole, is as close to this realm of being as we can be, because it is seen when it's seen as a whole. It's often people who've had the experience talk about it being a oneness, which is another word of a whole of parts. A oneness, everything together in a oneness, whole. And they also, people who've had the experience often say it's reality. So it's not fake, it's the truth seen as a whole. Sometimes you'll have a whole tradition that's had thousands of years of history and they call it enlightenment. We are demystifying enlightenment by simply understanding what it is and how we can get there in the best kind of way, or what's another word of reaching something, a meaningful goal in the best kind of way? Virtue, maybe. So could you say philosophy, as another hypothesis, is the virtue or excellence of spirituality? Because we are understanding it by doing Apollo. We're practicing it. We're not just jumping up to the top in a one-off experience that we may or may not get by sitting on a mat chanting. As the expression goes, you can spend your whole life sweeping up at the ashram, which is a saying that means when you go to seek that state of mind through certain spiritual traditions, you go to an ashram where you often sit on a mat and meditate or chant or have a mantra or a koan. But when you're not sitting, you have to do the housework, and they make the students sweep up. So you can spend your whole life sweeping and not actually have any experience because there's no logos, there's no rational, ordered hierarchy of steps that we discover through the dialectic and the logos. You're either lucky or you ain't. But even then, there are problems if you just have the experience without the logos, as we've been talking about. So, if we do both, then even our Aphrodite experiences, we start with mini insights, mini enlightenments, mini Aphrodites. Have an insight about the opening. We've had a few insights in our reading already today, I think. Maybe. Got some pretty neat hypotheses, at least. And as we see greater levels of wholes in the text, the more we read, we're practicing seeing a whole of the opening sentence, a whole of the opening paragraph, the whole of the opening half, the whole of the text. What are we doing? Increasing our Aphrodite or insights to greater and greater wholes. So if insight is the same nature of enlightenment, only enlightenment is insight into the whole of all wholes, reality itself, then we are climbing the ladder or climbing the mountain, not trying to catapult to the top, which is important because you can ask a question, what would be the excellence? Being able to understand each level and experience each level, or simply being able to jump usually it's not even the top. It's what they think is the top because that's the level that their tradition recognizes as the top without understanding. So which has more excellence? Springboarding to a certain state of being, or understanding logos, Apollo, and experiencing Aphrodite, each level as you climb higher and higher? Good question. If the latter is more excellence, we could say with confidence, or at least with understanding, that philosophy is the excellence of spirituality, or the excellence of personal development. And we'd be able to reason somebody through with this kind of dialogue, each step on board, climbing the mountain together. Just like if you were a Sherpa, which is a guide to help somebody climb a mountain, you've probably climbed it before. You've taken each step yourself so you can guide someone else there. Is that ability to guide someone else through their spiritual or personal development more excellent than just simply jumping to the top without being able to understand it and pass it on or benefit others? These are good questions that come up when we are reading the Meno and discovering excellence. So, being what does Socrates say about Meno's teacher Gorgias? He teaches you to answer in a fearless and grand style. Well, maybe you don't need to do that if you can understand and guide. Does a Sherpa fearlessly and grandly say, do this? Or does he just simply guide you and help you along, understanding each part? Or a mechanic, let's say. See, people who actually show an understanding of their art, like a mechanic or a Sherpa or, I don't know, someone who understands how to fix your toaster. Very rarely do they make a big pompous scene of being grand and loud and confident. Usually they're just simple and obvious and maybe even curious and fun. Certain other subjects have this style. If you were to make a list of subjects like that may act in this way, unlike arts that have simple understanding, or an art, or have a system of understanding, excellence, what would you put in that category? Who seems to speak in this way? Politicians? Propaganda news networks? Preachers? Evangelists? Mum and dad, maybe, when they're trying to sound smart about something you know they don't sound smart about? Where you know that they're not smart about? Let me tell you about social media, son. Well, he's certainly loud and confident and fearless in his style. More good questions and hypotheses and patterns. Right, so both together, increasing levels of understanding in the Logos or Apollo, which is why we have to read a text, which is why this podcast is guided by Socrates and not me, which is why we have the ancient scroll. Thumbs up. And Apollo, and as Socrates says, these come together as Hermes, the fast messenger god. And what does Hermes do? Rushes you towards Olympia, the place of the gods. And what's that called? That represents the dialectic. Which is interesting because here's another triad for our inventory. So you can rub it up against other triads. What do we have so far? We have this triad, self, the particular, the honorific, or the ideal, the ultimate. Can you rub those together to get an insight? Have fun. But also, we are trying to read in the second kind of way through the dialectic. Socrates says, hey, the first kind of reading is trusting and remembering and repeating over coffee. And every time we say coffee, we have a sip of coffee because that's so fun for us. Oh, so hot. Still really hot. And our second kind of reading, maybe to do with unlocking the twist or the second level of reading, is to learn with the dialectic, apply the structure of the dialectic. So our question is, well, our task is what is the dialectic and how can we demonstrate it? But also it's the union of the two. So the more that we read and remember and find a way of remembering the terms and pull out the key terms, the more we reflect and trying to piece it together as wholes, the more we're getting the necessary conditions for the ideal, which is the dialectic, which is what elevates us to that higher state of nous or enlightenment. It's the journey. It's the true, well, maybe it's the true art, or maybe the true virtue of how to climb that ladder or climb that mountain. So as we have a question, what is art? What is virtue or excellence? What is mastery? We've got these questions. Now that we've seen more about the dialectic in this reflection, can we apply this as a hypothesis to all of them? Does art involve the dialectic? Does excellence involve the dialectic? To master something, is it to see the dialectical structure within it? I don't know, but there are good questions. Our question sack in our adventurer's inventory,
You're a wizard, Harry.
is getting fat with juicy goodness. So, good for us. All right, so here is another triad. So let's draw a triad next to it because we have, it's just come to light for us now that these 3 levels of questions in a good film or book is 3, which is a triad. So we can add that to our skill tree of 3s. First level of question. This is Grandma at the inception with us. That was a lovely film. I'm glad he did that thing he said he was going to do at the beginning. At the beginning, we were given a question and he got the answer at the end. That was the last scene of the movie. I'm glad you enjoyed it, Grandma. What was your favorite part? What? I've forgotten the whole thing. You're a lovely boy. Grandma.
Flibbity jibbity nonsense.
What in the heck are we talking about here?
Joe, did you forget the whole film because you only watched it with the level of virtue of the first question?
What in the heck are we talking about here?
Oh, Joe, Grandpa Joe. All right. The second, we're given a second question at the end, the twist, often or more artfully given within. And see a pattern, apply it, especially if it unfolds to a triad. So this is another principle. If you see a pattern or a pair, try and find a third. Apply it to the triads. Which one is missing? If you've got a pair of things, are you given an ultimate? Are you given a particular and an honorific? In which case, fill out the last one. Maybe you'll discover something. Maybe that particular activity of discovering a 2 and filling in the third is what Christopher Nolan wants you to do because that will give you the answer to the question. This is a technique. This is part of abduction or analogical abduction, a way of teaching where you say, for analogies, you might say, just use our basic analogy, one that we always use, shepherds and sheep. A shepherd is to his sheep, is to his tent, is to his guard dog. So somebody who's teaching us, whoever it is, Nolan, Socrates, anybody, says, hey, I'll teach you about what it means. I'll tell you a story about this. A shepherd relating to his sheep, his tent, and his guard dog. And by the way, after I tell you that story, I will say, that's a story to show you how a king relates to his subjects. Now, that's great. But here's the thing. We've got this connection, we've got this connection. This connection. He might say, hey, by the way, this is our next level of question. He will say to you, what about the tent and the guard dog? So that's our second level. And there might be a third level where you have to discover this from the text and this. So finding a pattern, a set of terms, relationships, and pushing the implications of the pattern. So we can get the surface reading, know some things about king related to his subjects, but then we realize, hang on a second, in that story, he told us about the shepherd having a tent and guard dog, but he didn't give us the answers. We must have to figure out the answers. That's the second level, where he gives you the question, but not the answers. And then there might be another one where you have to discover the question and the answer. So, over here, we have a duad, first and second level, and we want to push the implications to see the triad, which is not given the question or the answer. 3 levels of reading. So this is grandma at inception. This is you at inception. You walk away, hang on a second. He left his spinning top spinning. There's a twist. I've got to reread it, or at least reflect on the piece of art again in a new way to find our Aphrodite and greater connection of wholes. But then after you get that, you'll be feeling really pleased about yourself. Then you'll jump on YouTube one day and YouTube will suggest, the algorithm will suggest you a video essay by some guy who's been reflecting more than you on the piece of art, and he realizes there's a third level of question and he's very excited about it, and he tells you about it and you're like, wow, I never thought of it that way. Is that way of watching a film more virtuous, more excellent than the way your grandma watched it? Or Joe?
What in the heck are we talking about here?
We're talking about Inception, Joe. So, we have a question. Does reading relate to virtue? And is it a principle? Should we be looking for those 3 levels in all things? Now, what's really fascinating is this whole thing we've just outlined is inherent within Greek language. Why? Because the word altos, which is self, means 3 things. It means the particular. This is the obvious thing. So if we're talking about something, we say it, that thing. But it has the higher level. If you know you're in the game of philosophy, you know Socrates ain't talking about physical things. He wouldn't be wasting his time on this planet doing that. So we have to find that higher reading. But also, hey, the word altos means honorific. So self-beauty, self-justice, these are the things in being. When we read Homer's Iliad, which we'll do at some stage on this channel, he talks about Achilles having the self-shield and riding the self-horse, which is to do with excellence, the excellence of the shield, the excellence of the horse. So we can bring the word altos into our question about what exactly excellence or virtue is. That's another new level for us, hooray. But in philosophy, and we have a reading of the first hypothesis of Parmenides on the YouTube channel. Feel free to check it out.
Wow. Wow.
Where he explores that which is beyond even, thumbs up, beyond even the honorific, the ultimate, sometimes called the one self. So, what does that mean? When we read, whenever we come across the word self, we have 3 possibilities of reading it. Take your pick. We will always read this one because that will make sense narratively all the time. This one, sometimes it'll make more sense than others. Sometimes you gotta do a little bit more work. Just like, where's our analogy of the king? Sometimes it'll be obvious, sometimes you can do a bit more work. And this one, whoa.
Wow. Wow. Wow.
This one's even harder to see sometimes. How does what we just what we have just read relate to the ultimate, to what is beyond even being the one self? Because hey, even in the experience of ultimate enlightenment, you climb to the top of that spiritual mountain with Socrates as our Sherpa. Hopefully you've had enough practice in developing questions and you're not so overwhelmed by beauty itself that you can ask some questions. What is having the experience? What created it? What's the cause of it? Lots of great questions, and hopefully you're used to asking questions. And in philosophical midwifery, one of the characteristics of developing a fundamental false belief that causes all of our problems, or most of our problems, fundamental problems, is we didn't ask questions. It was usually not safe to ask questions. And so in the practice of philosophical midwifery, the new paradigm for understanding human problems, we discover the early scene, the origin scene, and we ask questions. Even in the presence of someone who appeared fearless and in a grand style. When we were young and our parents says, "Don't you ever do that in my house." And you, wow, fearless. I've never seen him be that before. And I would never have thought it was bad to ask a question about Jesus, or to say I love a girl, or to say I'm interested in this activity. I always think of, who is that guy? Not Billy Madison. Billy Elliot. Billy Elliot's the film, which I find funny because it's kind of like, it takes the cliche that's used in hundreds of films and stories, and it gives it it hits us over the head with it. It's the least subtle way of doing this film. It's called Billy Elliot. I think it won an Oscar or a bunch of awards back in the day. And it's funny to me because it's so obvious. It's not subtle. It's like a M. Night Shyamalan twist. It ain't obvious with the second level of question. Billy Elliot is not. Well, yeah, it's not subtle. It's not subtle with the second level. So M. Night Shyamalan is very obvious and not subtle with his twist, just like Billy Elliot is not subtle with this trope, which is what? A kid is curious about a certain activity that might allow him to discover the logos or his virtue, and the father or mother says in a fearless and grand style, like Gorgias teaches, no. And Billy Elliot is a little British kid in a sad British town, concrete houses, the mines are closing and everyone's sad, and he goes, "Daddy, I want to do ballet. Can I do ballet, Daddy?" And Daddy goes, "No, ballet? No, not in this house you can't." "But I want to do ballet, Dad." "No, son, you do football like a boy. Not in this house." Now, the success of those kinds of narratives is the child realizing that his dad has a problem and not to take it on himself. It's a false belief. Maybe it'll give him acceptance within the family and also the culture and maybe also the religion, but he has to realize that he has to go and seek his excellence in what he's naturally curious about himself. It's the archetype, and Billy Elliot's funny because it's obvious. So, in a similar way, as we learn in our philosophical midwifery readings, this book, The New Paradigm of Understanding Human Problems, discovering the logos in how we have our problems and how to free ourselves from our problems. There was an early scene where we faced that and we weren't able to ask questions. In the face of what appeared true and real and wise and beautiful, or in a word, excellence. The appearance of excellence We walked away and we thought, wow, that must be true, number one. Number two, we couldn't ask questions. We couldn't even put the underlying belief that made sense of that into words. So it's an unsuspected false belief. In midwifery, we discover it and put words on it. But also we walk away saying, hey, I just love ballet. I could never have thought there was something so bad about that. So not only is ballet bad, I'm bad, and my way of thinking is bad, and my mind itself is bad, because I would never have thought that. So you doubt your activity, you doubt yourself, you doubt your mind, you doubt your passions. And if I ever voiced it, wow, what happened when I put words on it? Wow, I got really yelled at. No ballet in this house, Billy. You do football like a boy. You doubt the logos. And this becomes an unsuspected false belief about the logos, about your mind, about self, about reality, about virtue that manifests in all different different ways in your life and leads to a conclusion. Let's see it in the dialectic. Leads to a false definition in yourself about those most important things, which demonstrates it in a certain state of mind, limited, not enlightened, not clear, troubled, depressed, sad, less energy, all sorts of demonstrations in your states of mind, divides into every area of your life and ends up with you concluding in repeating cycles of problems and never reaching a goal, but keeping the same. Curiously, relating, as we see with synthesis, relates back to the start, allows you to conclude in the certain sort of negative state of mind, negative understanding, and negative activity. There's a triad for you. Activity, state of mind, and understanding. That relates back to the first thing, a state of mind and functioning just like Daddy did. So it doesn't go upwards, stays stagnant. Whereas we talked about last time, when we go through the true dialectic, Apollo, Aphrodite, and Hermes, the dialectic, we end up higher, more understanding, more virtuous than when we started. So it spirals upwards. And of course, anybody who is familiar with movies and films and TV shows, pretty much every one of them has this character arc. The main character has a problem. That's the obvious question at the start that he has to answer. And he realizes at some stage the cause of his problem is, or he is imitating or demonstrating the exact same state of mind that his dad did to him when he got shut down. So recently The Boys is popular. The main dude, the British guy who doesn't like the soups, realized that he is functioning in the world in the exact same negative way his dad did to him. The Marvel superhero series is another popular mythology of our culture. And in the last film, the three main characters, Thor, Captain America, and Iron Man, have to go back to the past and address their parental figures so they can escape the problems they're in. Of course, the film directors don't understand the logos yet, so it's not quite reflecting what we're going to learn in philosophical midwifery, but we can see it there. It's an archetype. So what? Well, so hopefully we have developed some sort of practice, habit of asking questions even when overwhelmed by the appearance of beauty and justice, some preacher yelling at us, or some politician with fancy suit, or some popular YouTube celebrity, or even our parents or parental surrogates. We develop an art of even asking questions then, to the point where even in the experience of beauty itself, the honorific self-beauty, self-justice the perfection of beauty, eternally and immortally. We've got that maybe virtue, question mark, of asking questions so we can ask about what's the ultimate, what's the third level, what's the cause even of that. So what are we doing? We're taking the questions, the kinds of questions, and the kinds of ways of answering questions that brought us from our physical world into the honorific. What sort of questions? I see many beautiful things, beautiful people, beautiful puppies. What is the cause of beauty? Or rather, what is beauty itself? The noun that gets reflected as adjectives. That's a question. And it's a pattern. We use it all the time, going from the many to the one. Also, a way of answering questions. How do we answer it? Well, Apollo and Aphrodite. And ultimately, the two together, Hermes. So dialectic is a way of answering those questions. So can we bring what led us to the honorific, to the highest experience, what's called enlightenment, the enlightenment experience, beauty itself, through a habit or a practice, not just habit, we've also understood it. So therefore, moving from habit to virtue maybe? Can we bring this kind of virtue, even in the most overwhelming experience of bliss itself, complete union with beauty itself, to move beyond even that? What would that be? I don't know. Can you notice a manyness, even in a oneness? Because oneness is a union or a oneness of things or a wholeness. Can you recognize aspects? Well, hopefully your training in philosophy has helped you to recognize aspects, because those are the ideas. Beauty itself is an aspect. Justice itself is an aspect. Equality itself is an aspect. Sameness itself is an aspect. What's mistranslated as forms by people who teach Socrates at college the way that your grandma watches Inception. There are aspects. So maybe your training in metaphysics, in philosophy, has helped you recognize, even in an overwhelming experience of oneness, that there are parts that are unified, allowing you to ask the kind of questions you have developed as a virtue in your life. Ooh. So you're not afraid and run back into your body or reincarnation, but you're also not overwhelmed and forget. But also, we're learning a way of answering questions. That's the dialectic. So can we even apply the same way in midwifery? We apply this way of asking questions and answering them, even in the overwhelming conditions of being a child, where it was important for our survival to not ask questions and get a problem, a pathologos, a false logos. So too, in philosophy, we are learning in the excellence. How do we go from our physical world of its to the honorifics? Can we take that when we are in that honorific? We're not afraid of it because of our pathologos, and we can take our training in the logos to ask a kind of question and seek a kind of answer that can elevate us to the ultimate. Something that isn't available to spiritual traditions or habits that lack the logos. The habit of meditation, the habit of prayer, the habit of chanting, the habit of, I said mantras? Physical activities, dance, sitting under a waterfall in the snow. Okay, those sorts of things that might elicit a kind of experience, like huge displays of energies. In Hunter x Hunter, there are two ways of awakening your Nen. One is through development, one is all of a sudden through a dangerous display of energy. That's a fun analogy of this. If you're unfamiliar with Hunter x Hunter, forget about it. It's just an analogy for those familiar. So those traditions don't allow for that movement. So their enlightenment experiences usually are a reflection of what we would understand as metaphysics. Beauty itself, the honorific. So, good for us. Hooray. And balloons? balloons. So 3 levels of questions, or 3 levels of reality, and we are seeing reflected 3 levels of questions. So, and that is reflected in the word self. So in the opening of the Meno, we are introduced to the word self, telling us maybe, hey, make sure you read the text at 3 levels, because that's what the word altos is. Also, it's important to recognize it's only ever translated pretty much all the time as only the lesser, which is why most professors of philosophy only have grandma's level of reading. And that's why we're so fortunate to have the WHAAA text. And it's free. Check it out. So you don't have to be rich to play. Anyone can play. And we also want to have that 3rd level, so we have to discover even the question. So cool that we get it in the opening, in the introduction, almost defining in the opening what's going to unfold. Or in video games, we call it a training level, or the opening often gives you the tools you need to play the rest of the game, which is cool.
Wow.
All right, so what in the world is self-excellence? So let's practice the 3 levels of reading, the 3 levels of question. Socrates says, I stand in need of knowing whether or not excellence can be taught, and whether excellence is teachable or not. So neither do I happen to know what in the world is self-excellence. First level of reading, particular. Let's do it. So neither do I happen to know what in the world excellence itself is. This thing, it is. Second level of reading, self and the honorific. Now this is a little bit more obvious, so often the twist is more obvious. Second level, that's why our translator gives it a capital S. Neither do I happen to know what in the world self-excellence is, the ideal of excellence, the ultimate, the paradigm, the archetype. So the subject of our sentence. What are we talking about? Virtue. Excellence. The honorific, what does it mean what is it? It's anybody, you, me, Gorgias, Meno, Socrates, an alien species. What is excellence itself that's reflected as adjectives? What's the noun that's the cause of adjectives? Now the 3rd level of reading. What in the world is the one self excellence? What the heck does that mean? Because from what I've heard, the one self is beyond understanding, maybe. Or a different kind of understanding might be more accurate, because there is a whole lot of understanding in the first hypothesis of Parmenides. But it's the cause of experience, so it's beyond experience. What would be the kind of excellence of the one self, which is the paradigm of even the paradigm, the cause of the paradigm, if there is self-excellence and self-beauty and self-justice? What caused it? It had to come from somewhere. The kind of questions we talked about just now, bringing with us to enlightenment experiences. What? That had to come from something. So this self-excellence in the honorific had to have been caused by something, which itself must have to have as some kind of quality excellence in order to cause self-excellence. But it has to be before even experiences. So how can there be an excellence of the oneself, which is beyond even regular understanding and beyond even the highest experience? See how tricky the 3rd level of question is? See why there has to be this ecosystem of YouTube channels where film theories and deep dives and they call it now icebergs So if you want to know about Hunter x Hunter, check out that Hunter x Hunter iceberg, which is like levels of depth of reading of a text or a film. The iceberg. How do you answer that question? The third one, I don't know. You need to read a lot of essays and go on a deep dive for hopefully for years. Develop that question, hold that question. What the hell would be the excellence of the oneself? And is Socrates there right now? Is he not just defining it, but demonstrating it? If so, there might be levels of excellence where if the honorific is to do with the highest experience, the brilliant light of being, or oneness of beauty itself, or justice itself, or self-excellence, is there a level of enlightenment beyond even that where you can still be in your body and function as Socrates is doing? In which case, that would be the ultimate level, or the third reading, or the third level of question of what would be self-excellence, ultimate excellence. And is Socrates in there? Because he's not blissing out. Now, there are texts where Socrates does separate himself from people and go into a state. At the people familiar with the symposium, Socrates is on the way to a big party. Everyone's drinking and having fun, and the greatest talking about Christopher Nolan and M. Night Shyamalan, the versions of them in his day, the best comedy and tragic playwrights. The day after their Oscars, they're all drinking, having fun. They invited Socrates along. And right before he goes, he's on his way with his friend, and his friend goes in, he goes, oh, hang on a second. And he's standing on the porch of the next door neighbor, just standing on his next door neighbor's porch, standing still. What's he doing? And in the symposium, there are other accounts of Socrates doing something like that. But we might say, well, maybe he's in this state of being, and therefore his body has to stand still, or something else is keeping his body upright and still. But then he goes back into his body and has amazing dialogues at this party, really shows up all of the people who are getting all of the awards. Funny that we're talking about people who get awards and degrees and jobs teaching philosophy can be shown up by this level of reading. So too, he shows up those people. So he must have been in maybe a state of excellence that relates to this third level of reading, the ultimate excellence, beyond even the honorific. Particular, honorific, ultimate. Now, what does that mean? Who knows? Question. Good. We need a question. That's how we read. And also a nice demonstration at the beginning, first page, a nice foreshadowing, training level, and a nice thing for us to wonder about. And every time we see the word self, we have an invitation to do all three. And from my own personal experience, reading in this kind of a way with other people, many of whom have done it for many, many years, it's very triggering and challenging. Many people, quite rightly so, throwing their hands up. How could it mean the honorific? The only thing that makes sense is the particular. Good. And by the way, their teacher encouraged that because that's having a question. Puzzled. Yeah, it can be frustrating. Yeah, you can want to shout or punch a wall or send an angry email to the Socrates' manager. Socrates, that doesn't make sense. Surely there's only one way of reading it. Being comfortable in that uncomfortable state of not knowing. It's okay. Of course, we can ask the question, how can we be accustomed to it? Or how can we handle that curiosity or having questions? And the more meaningful the question, the more puzzling and frustrating it can be. How can we handle it with grace? It's a challenge. I teach guitar myself, and often I feel myself, because having played and learnt guitar for a long time, I know the excitement of having answers, because it can unlock different things, different ways of playing, different ways of seeing their fretboard. So there can be a desire to rush to the answers, and I have to step back and realize, no, the question is more important. And my students always say that. Yeah, I really liked having this puzzle or discovering this question. And one of the surprising things in teaching music is how much the question is preferred, which was very counterintuitive based on the way I was taught. Give the right answers, give the right answers. That's what you get your grades for. That's what you get your honors for. That's what you get the degrees for. It's what you get the paychecks for. It's not the same, not the case. So we might say there are a lot of people like Gorgias in our world. Whereas Socrates says, hey, I am right now in a state of not knowing this and wanting to know whether it's teachable and what it is. Notice, Meno didn't ask what it is. What does that mean? Is he curious? Or does he think he's got it figured out because he's got his teacher and his lover? Probably gives him a lot of confidence as well. He's got a fearless and grand style. What's that called? Being certain, right? Gets you the degrees, right? Marketing, big industry in our world. One of the most popular, one of the most taught at university, but also potentially the most harmful. How to appear smart. How to give answers that may or may not be true, but who cares? It makes you a profit, makes you the bucks, or gets you famous. Love of riches, philoklimatos. Lover of honor, philotimos. Not lover of learning, philomathesis, or lover of wisdom, philosophia. Socrates distinguishes those kinds of people in the Phaedo. So which is excellence? Which is true virtue? Socrates wants to know, and he's improving maybe the question, what is excellence? And he's asking it on the 3 levels. So he's doing pretty well, Socrates. Thus since self has to be in such a reality as this, reality has to be in the ideal, capital S. I am also as poor as the rest of the citizens, and I reproach myself since I know nothing at all about virtue. Big question. It's Socrates talking. This is who we're learning virtue from. What's he talking about? Thus, if I do not know what it is, how can I know its qualities? Or does it appear to be possible to you that if there is nothing at all one recognized about Meno, how could this person know whether Meno is handsome or rich or noble or has the opposite of the qualities? Notice, what did we just say? We asked the question, is lover of learning and lover of wisdom more virtuous than desires, riches, and honors? And we also have been talking about the appearance of wisdom. When Socrates says, hey, if you know nothing about Meno, how would you know whether Meno is handsome, appearance, rich, love of riches, noble, lover of fame? Lover of riches, philoklimatos. Lover of noble or famous, philotimos. Handsome, the appearance, physical beauty. So if one doesn't recognize Meno, how could he recognize these things? What does that mean? Does that mean if these 3 descriptions turn out to be true, maybe Socrates does recognize Meno and therefore his qualities? In which case, what does that indicate? Is that art? Does he use the dialectic and the logos to recognize those things? Does he have a mastery of some kind that allows him to recognize those things? Just like if you're a mechanic, you might look at an engine and instantly recognize, okay, the engine, it's the wrong carburetor, it needs a service, the spark plug is worn. 3 qualities you might recognize with an art. Does Socrates recognize these things and start berating Meno in a fearless and grand style? Or is he using it in a conversation to benefit him? Is that the dialectic? Is that art? Is that mastery? So the good thing about having the 3 questions, well, the questions we're carrying with us, let's make sure we've got it written down somewhere. Have we? No, let's write it down then. Questions we are carrying. Yeah. First of all, what is reading? Because we're reading this text. What is the logos? The whole reason we're reading this text is because we're on a hunt to discover what this logos thing is. That might be the meaning of life. But Socrates in the Phaedo said we have to master it. He talked about the problems that would happen if we don't, side B. So we have a question, what does it mean to master? He says, no, what is art? Because he said you need the art of the logos. If you stay at just trusting or learning, the first level of reading, if you just listen to me the same way Grandma watches Inception, you can get tricked. Someone can come along and say, hey, you know that Inception movie? It was about the devil. And Grandma will go, really, was it? Oh my stars, I hate that Christopher Nolan. And you know what? Films are the tools of the devil. And she can hate films or hate Christopher Nolan. Socrates made the same point in the Phaedo. If you just trust the logos, even though it's from Socrates, and it's probably true, and the first learning is to remember and repeat it over coffee with friends. So we have a drink because I mentioned coffee. Then if somebody comes along, if you haven't got the art to judge for yourself, they can trick you. And Socrates says you might end up hating the logos. Those loud people like Gorgias might use a prejudice or a religious belief that somehow touches a bruise or is familiar or probable. And you end up hating the logos. And then that's the worst, the greatest defect of the soul, because you won't get truth. So he said you have to have the art of the logos, move beyond just trust and repetition. We also asked the question, what would it mean to master an art? What is mastery? And of course, we have the question from the text, what is virtue? So we kind of had these already going in, but we also have from the opening page, what is virtue or excellence? What else do we have? If you can think of any others, share them in the chat. Or on comments on YouTube. Or you can join Discord, link below, and you can share them. And we have conversations on Discord. It's lots of fun. And you get notifications whenever we go live. What is virtue? What else do we have? Oh! Can it be taught? Let's not forget that one. Can virtue or excellence be taught? This is a big one. I like this one. Often I use athletes to as an analogy. Of course, it isn't true excellence if you're using it on the basketball court, but it's it's kind of like this is the role that mythology plays. It gives us a talking point or a common shared physical experience to think about, which is why it's important to, when you do your dialectics, share them in whatever art you make, or pick up an art. Try and make a short film or a YouTube video or a fan fiction or a story or a novel or a song or a sculpture or a painting, whatever you like to do. And then use the dialectic that you've discovered and find analogies to represent it through art. Because very few people maybe will come across my channel, but how many billions of people watched the last Avengers movie where Thor, Captain America, and Iron Man all went back to address their parents? So we could use that as a touchstone to talk about the need to get to the cause of our problem, an imitation of a way of being of our parents that limits us in our pursuit of excellence. And of course, these people seek the highest excellence. Iron Man has to be the best human being that he can be. And that's his character arc. Thor has to be the best demigod that he can be. Captain America has to be the best super soldier he can be. Seeking excellence. It gives us an opportunity to talk about it, but also if our people who are like this kind of thing becomes the filmmaker themselves, they can also use it to communicate the actual dialectic that you have done, to give people an opportunity to climb the ladder themselves, which is great. So, can excellence be taught? So, and the reason I'm talking about that is one such touchstone is basketball. Now, we could ask the question, hey, when Steph Curry got in the zone, can you teach that? Or when a baseball pitcher is pitching a no-hitter, normally he's at this level, but all of a sudden he's the best pitcher in the world and he's never shown that potential before. And so between innings, all of the people are over this side of the bench and he's over here by himself because they don't have the logos. They don't understand what he's doing. So they don't even speak to him. So can you teach that? And well, yeah, the fact that nobody teaches them, no one speaks to them shows you can't teach it. Otherwise, they wouldn't be afraid of saying the wrong thing. Or can you teach that? If this is related to excellence, if that state of being is related to excellence, can you teach it? Now, if you would ask Steph Curry or LeBron James or Michael Jordan, I think they usually say no, or they don't know. But if they do try and talk about how you teach it, they normally point to physical things, discipline, training, getting up every morning like Kobe Bryant and practicing in the gym. But that doesn't mean put you into that state. It's very, very rare. So, at least it's not only physical. Otherwise, every NBA player would be in that state, or at least half of them, because that's the level of training they do. Spilling coffee everywhere. 6 questions we have at least. And what's great about having these questions is every new thing we see, Apollo, in our reading, we can apply it to our questions. Does it unlock anything? Can we come up with a new hypothesis? Can it add to our question? Can we polish up our question, make it bright and shiny, like sharpening a sword or polishing a gem? Can we unlock a deeper question, like upgrading a sword? Or if you're a Diablo fan, upgrading a level of gem. So these are the questions we are carrying. If you think of more, share them, if you like. So, another one. So all of these questions, Socrates asking, mentioning these qualities about Meno. Yep. Is he reading Meno? Is he using the logos to recognize things? Is he using his recognition in an artful way? Is this a display of mastery of some kind? Is it excellent for him to use these things in his dialogue and not just ignore them? Or not use them to berate him or shoot him down and make him feel small? As many people do in debates. Almost all of the philosophical content I see online and is suggested to me in the algorithm are all debates. Usually it's some atheist having a debate with some person who has religious belief, who has no concern for the truth or understanding as the atheist does. So they don't talk. Usually the religious person just tries to stand up and proselytize and act knowing, and every time the atheist asks a question, he will try and shut down the logos and appeal to emotions or try and get into a flow state of talking. And it's very annoying and stupid, and no one changes their mind, and everyone ends up angry and and worse off than when they came in. Maybe not worse off. Maybe there's benefit of recognizing that people who are tied to a religious belief or faith and have no interest in understanding and have no interest in a fair dialogue, or are maybe not worth learning from if you are interested in truth. Or rather, it might help us realize, hang on a second, maybe there's something fundamentally wrong with debates altogether. And it's not just religious people, other people who have no interest in learning something new because they get a paycheck, because they get honor. There we go, love of riches, love of honor, like a news presenter. The mainstream news networks are all owned by billionaires who want to maintain the status quo, which means distract people from reasoning about the causes of problems, because usually it's to do with wealth inequality, corruption, exploitation through capitalism. So we don't want that to change because the billionaires get the money from it and they own the news networks. So any debate is by people who are set in their beliefs and they have no interest in changing them. So no insight, no understanding, no Apollo, Aphrodite, and Hermes, off the table. And they have some expert come in who tries to reason with them, and then these people just shoot it down, and it's very frustrating. And I have been watching the news for my whole life, and I've never seen anything happen that's good. I've never seen change. I've never seen the problems actually addressed. I've never seen a reporter actually do reporting or journalism and actually talk about the causes of problems. I've never seen anybody hold anybody to steps of reasoning. They allowed experts to proselytize, just give monologues or speeches that just reflect their dumb opinions. Nothing changes, nothing has helped. The same problems I saw on the news when I was 5 years old, I am seeing today. Why? Well, they're not like Socrates, are they? They're not saying, I don't know and I would like to know. I'm in a state open to reasoning about what it is and its qualities. So what would that be like on the news? Hey, do you know what a politician, do you know what a healthy society is and its qualities, and whether or not it's teachable, whether or not it's able to be implemented through the laws and societal institutions we have? You do? Bullshit. Maybe you don't, but we can learn about it together through reasoned reflection. Maybe that's an artful or masterful use of the excellence of the logos. So we can tie all these questions in together in this way if we like. Make it significant and meaningful. Now, it's easy to point fingers at other people because you could say society is the soul writ large. That's the whole premise of the Republic. Blow up our soul to the size of the society so we can see the aspects. But it would also be within our souls. We all have problems, human problems, where we think we know things we don't. That's the nature of ignorance. When are we closed to reflection? Myself, even when I might know, like teaching music and guitar. I will sometimes rush to the answer and miss out on the fun of having questions. And every single student brings in new experiences and insights that can build on my questions, which is why we talk about philosophy not being a one-person game. So, what state of mind are people in? And what state of mind is Socrates in? And which would be more virtuous, more excellent? And of course, when we are in a flow state, can that be taught? Can we keep that flow state not just when there are defenders trying to insult us, and in basketball it's called trash talk, trying to trash talk us to throw us off our game, when we're in the face of a politician or a evangelist of this or that religion? I'm not talking about yours, I'm talking about the other ones, the wrong ones, so don't get upset with me. I'm talking about the ones that are wrong, because you know that there are thousands of religions and yours is the right one, but not everyone else's. Just in case. Anyone who's tied to a belief and is trying to shut down the logos, end the conversation, attack you personally, kick out you personally, exclude or whatever. These are terrible, terrible things, which will not lead to learning, growth, evolution, harmony, all of the good things. Quite simply, it's quite obvious. But every news network, it's the same thing. Shouting over, not adhering to principles of dialectic, reason, reflection, understanding causes together. Shouting over people, putting down people, villainizing people. Oh, there's crime, not because you need to do crimes if you're poor to eat. No. People are stealing food because of they're just bad because they're the wrong color, or they're not rich enough. They haven't been born into the right families, so they're all bad. We should hate them. Says every mainstream news network that wants to blame the victims to keep the system the way it is. When are we like that? Socrates says, hey, when you're tricked by bad people or people who are functioning in a bad way or bad arguments, is it them or is it our lack of the art of the logos? Because you know what? Every human being is somewhere between excellence, talked about that level of enlightenment we seek, and their problem, which is itself the same principles, the shadow. He said if you took there are very few very, very small dogs or very, very tall dogs. Just like there are very few human beings who are completely worthless, as there are people who are completely enlightened, maybe like Socrates. Everyone is between here and there, some level. Often the more sociopathic are able to rise through the ranks of sociopathic systems. They get rewarded for that way of being. So in capitalism, CEOs are more often down here, just like politicians who reflect the kind of beliefs or pathologos or prejudices of society are more likely to be elected, which is why from someone who doesn't live in America, it's very easy to see that Donald Trump is we're talking about Billy Elliot being a caricature of the archetype in film. Donald Trump is the caricature of the archetype of a certain kind of person that lacks virtue or is vice, but he is rewarded in politics if he reflects the system and the society, just like the system of the society of capitalism reflects certain sorts of people. We know for a fact that there is a overwhelmingly larger percentage of CEOs in capitalism who are sociopathic. Using that terminology from modern psychology, we might not say that. We would say reflects a certain kind of way of being that's a certain kind of problem. Doesn't make humans, just because politicians and CEOs are like that, doesn't mean all humans are bad. Everyone is between there. It's our job to learn the art of the logos, says Socrates, so we can judge appropriately. Just like if you're Steph Curry playing basketball, there are going to be certain smack talkers. Often basketball players who are good defenders have gotten there because they know the way of smack talking. People who are familiar with the Michael Jordan story knows that part of Michael Jordan is a basketball player, often considered to be the GOAT or greatest of all time. And he's known for being not just a great attacker, but a defender. And one of the tools in his arsenal to be a good defender was to throw people off by certain kinds of smack talk that reflect their own personal problems. He would try all different sorts of smack talk, and he would pay very careful attention to what triggers the person, and that would throw them off their game. So take them out of the zone or the excellence of basketball they were aiming for. So too, is Socrates able to maintain a state of excellence when he's being thrown? The same way we ideally would want to, in the face of bad actors or people with ignorance. Can we extend a mastery, an art, a way of reading people, a way of reading the situation, a use of the logos to benefit them? Can we keep our excellence or keep our cool even in those situations? And how? How do we do that? And can the method of doing that be taught? These are all questions that we are on in this book. So let's take those questions and read a little bit further. Does this appear to be possible to you? What? That if you don't know anything about virtue, you can know its qualities, like its teachableness, like the questions we just asked. Just as if you don't know Meno, you won't be able to say whether he's rich or noble or handsome. Meno says, not as far as I am concerned, but do you truly, Socrates, not know whatever virtue is? That's our question. Come on, Socrates, are you really saying you don't know what virtue is? We asked that too, didn't we? Then are we to return home and report this? So Socrates is kind of famous. Am I to go home and say that Socrates has no idea what virtue is? I thought he was supposed to be this great philosopher who has wisdom and stuff. Isn't wisdom one of the virtues? Let's give this pink. That's cool. I'm going to highlight it because it's pretty funny. I go home and say Socrates knows nothing about virtue. Socrates, not only that, let's see how much his interest in being noble and well thought of and loved like Gorgias. Let's see, and maybe the fact that he asked this question indicates a kind of debating. Isn't that what these belief attached people who are not reasoning in good faith, but debating to maintain their opinions, whether it's news reporters, whether it's right-wing grifters, whether it's evangelists who make their living and fame from preaching their beliefs. Is that an ad hominem attack? Yeah, so is that what we're going to tell everyone, that you're this kind of a person? Ha 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 ha, distract from the logos. To someone who's interested in this, maybe it's an argument or a debate technique that would work. Let's see if Socrates bites. Let's see if the trash talk upsets our Michael Jordan of philosophy. Not only that, O companion, friend. Actually, let's see if the word is friend under here. So one of the great things about our time, yes, you can say it kind of sucks our time because we've only been able to read this for the last 5 or so years. So our society has been pretty much playing out in real time a dialectic, or the patterns and the implications, the consequences that follow not having the logos, which is why our society has been in a never-ending cycle of pathologos, or repeating the cycles of negative states of mind, division, all this debate bro stuff, all this capitalism and political anti-logos we've been talking about. That's been our society. Even though that's the case, and it sucks to be at the end of it, late stage capitalism, some people call it, there is some benefit in the fact that we have this. We can go to space, which isn't supposed to be space. It's supposed to be... where is it? Here we go. Not that one. This one. The internet. Not only do we have a text which we can read, pick up the correct ourselves, right the ship, but we have the internet, so we can go to this web page and translate it into Greek. Go to this web page and etere, find a way of pronouncing the ancient Greek language, which is cool. Etere. We can use Wiktionary and also this ancient Greek dictionary. It's called a lexicon to find for ourselves. Comrade, companion, comrade in arms, messmate. Oh, fellow traveler is a term used when Socrates is talking about what it's like to escape the cycles of reincarnation. You go to a place where you meet other people who are now don't have to be incarnated physically and souls without bodies. And he calls them better men who've completed their work, daemons and gods, who are fellow travelers. So this is a comrade in arms, companion, a mate. So maybe, what's the word again? Etere. So maybe not the same as beloved or friend, but someone on a journey together. Now that's interesting, because let's relate it to here. Because he's also talked about your companion. Is it the same as this word here? What are we looking for? Sameness and differences. Is there a puzzle hidden by the contrast? Eteru. Same word. Etere, eteru. Same word. Okay? So his former companion, Socrates, is now saying, now you're my companion. Curious. So, your companion, Aristippus, and his culture, the Larisseans. Let's read this section again. In times past, the Thessalians were famous and admired by the Hellenes for their horsemanship and riches, not wisdom. But on the other hand, it appears to me that they're also famous for their wisdom. Okay, they are wisdom. Not in the least the citizens of your companion, etere, Aristippus, the Larisseans. Does that mean that they are famous for wisdom, or that they appreciate the Thessalians? But Gorgias brought this about for you, for he came to the city, the leading men of the family of Aleos, to which your lover Aristippus belongs, and the rest of the Thessalians. So his love as a Thessalian fell in love with his wisdom. Okay, so Gorgias caused a way of thinking that's called wise, that the Thessalians and his lover Aristippus admire, but also the Larisseans. Now, it's unclear what he means. Does he mean that his companion Aristippus and the Lycians admire this kind of wisdom, or they are also wise? So another great thing we can do is because of our times, do this. Look at a past translation which isn't accurate completely and doesn't have the Greek, but might have a way of phrasing it that is better to help us follow the English. Let's do that too. Meno. Of old, the Thessalians were famous and admired among the Greeks for their riding and their riches, but now they have a name, I believe, for wisdom also. They've got a name for being wise too, especially your friend Aristippus's people, the Larisseans. Okay, so the Larisseans might be a subclass of the Thessalians. Woof. Why isn't he talking about like regular things like Californians and Americans, or I don't know. No, I suppose it's fair because anybody who watches or has heard someone talk about Star Wars, they have crazy names like this for people. You have to thank Gorgias for when he came to that city, he made a leading men of Aludia, among them your lover, Aristippus, and the Thessalians generally enamored of wisdom. So Gorgias was the cause for their interest. They were only interested in money and horse riding. Riches and cars. Who's that like? Who do you know who's only interested in riches and cars? Bugattis, space rockets, electric cars, and money. Whose whole thing is that? And how often are they recommended in your YouTube feed? How often are they talked about on various kinds of media? How many of us are enamored of wisdom? More than that, Gorgias has given you the regular habit of answering any question in a fearless and magnificent manner, as it befits those who know. For he sets an example of offering himself to be... Oh, so that's what he was saying. So Gorgias himself demonstrates this, using our language of the dialectic, offering himself to be questioned by any Greek who chooses. And on any point one likes. Right? We call that an ask me anything or convince me otherwise in our culture right now. And he has an answer for everybody. Now, in this place, my dear Meno, we have a contrary state of things, a drought of wisdom. Do we also see this in our politicians and things? So they come on and they just get asked any question and they just follow along? Or to say, no, what's actually important is to address the nature of our problems and the causes of our problems and what would address them. If you're asking me about whatever is the popular social bollocks thing right now, or should women play sports, or any other gender stuff or distraction stuff or racist stuff, do they answer all those questions? Usually. It's a good distraction from the real ones, right? Or do you want to hear your politicians talk about nonsense social war bollocks, or do you want to see if they have the wisdom to actually diagnose, judge the nature of society, and also be able to use an art to not just diagnose it, but remedy it? I know which one I pick, and I know which one is lacking, at least for as long as I've been alive. Okay, in our place, we have a contrary state of things, a drought of wisdom, as it were. As it seems, wisdom has deserted our borders in favor of yours. It seems, keyword seems. You have only to ask one of our people a question such as that, and he would surely be sure to laugh and say, stranger, what are you saying? Stranger, you must think me a specially favored mortal to be able to tell whether virtue can be taught or in what way it comes to one, so far as I am from knowing whether it can be taught or not. that I actually do not even know what the thing itself, virtue, is at all. And I myself, Meno, am in the same case. I share my townsman's poverty in this manner. I have to reproach myself with utter ignorance about virtue. What would that be like on TV? Hey, should we improve our schools? Well, that's a good question, television reporter, to ask a politician. Before we can ask whether or not virtue can be taught, shouldn't we be asking what our schools should be teaching? Should we be teaching nonsense or capitalism or slavery, or to appease teacher with opinions and interpretations that matches the teacher's ideas, way of thinking? Or should we be teaching the logos? Should we be teaching dream analysis? Should we be teaching the dialectic? Philosophy. By the way, the last conversation that you had on the news, you just asked more money to schools, yes or no? So our education has failed us because you are on television and a news reporter and you asked a very poor question. Meno. I mean, not Meno, I mean news reporter of today. So maybe we should be asking what education is or what virtue is first before we get on to how many dollars we should spend on it. Or lower taxes. Maybe we should ask what a healthy society is first before we ask whether or not it can be achieved or taught through lowering taxes for the rich. Because it seems to be implying that's the good thing to do. Same thing, stock market. Hey, we need a healthy stock market. Says who? Hospitals earn more money the more sick people there are. So is the stock market or profits a good indication of a healthy society, or the opposite? Why do you keep talking about stock markets? Jobs, more jobs, people want jobs. Are you a politician who gets jobs for people? Says who? All the rich people I know don't want a damn job. If jobs were important, the rich people would buy them all up already. Why are you pretending or acting as though you know the thing itself and you're only talking about its teachability? Do we have a healthy society if we teach it by having employed people? People who have to work 3 jobs just to be able to pay rent? More jobs, is that what we want? Or should we be like Socrates saying, before we talk about whether or not it can be taught, now I'm using society as a magnifying glass because we're really interested in the soul. Obviously, the byproducts would be great if we had this as a society, but we're interested in our soul. So, equally so, talking about virtue. Hey, someone says you should go to church more. Should we, for our soul, it's going to help your soul, you go to heaven. Should we be saying how often we should be going to church, or should we be asking what heaven is or what virtue is first? When you beat yourself up for not being good enough, is that a good way of teaching you virtue? Or should you first, before you ever beat yourself up, before you ever say you're not good enough, before you ever say you're inadequate right now, less than perfect in a kind of way right now, before you do any of those things, should you first ask, what is a perfect soul? Is it some immaculate Jesus-like fantasy that no one by definition can ever be? Is it some flawless creature that was born knowing everything so they can never be wrong and never be punished? Is that society's idea? Your family's idea? Or is it the truth? So for our souls, before we ever treat ourselves in a negative way, or even go sign up for them at the monastery or whatever, should we first ask ourselves what the virtue of this excellence of the soul is before we go down that rabbit hole, or whether or not it can be given to us by beating ourselves up, by grinding harder, by climbing the corporate ladder, by going to church more, praying harder? Because you might just be causing more problems in that way by not first asking what it is. And what is formally the way of the system or the subject that asks what virtue is? Politics? Nope. Never asked that question. Religion? Nope. Doesn't ask it as a question. Gives you faith without addressing it directly. Might give you some commandments. Might give you a list of contradicting ideas based on Bronze Age customs and mythologies. Doesn't formally address it as a subject of inquiry to understand and know itself. What else asks what virtue is? TV? School? Philosophy? This. So, as souls, we need to be in this game before we can go ahead and put ourselves down or angrily attack other people for not being good enough, and as though that would make them better, or make us better, or more virtuous. Socrates doesn't know whether it is what it is or whether it can be taught. I am in poverty of this matter. It's a key word. Those familiar with the symposium recognizes the significance of the idea of poverty of the soul. I have to reproach myself in utter ignorance about virtue. And if I do not know what a thing is, how can I know its nature, what its nature may be? Or do you imagine it possible, if one has no cognizance at all of Meno, that one could know whether he is handsome or rich or noble or the reverse of these? Do you suppose that one could? So a little bit clearer now that we read this other translation. So we're not completely throwing baby out with the bathwater just because it doesn't have the keywords translated and key sections are missing, and the word self isn't in there and the word idea isn't in there and so on. It can give us a bit of a flow. So, you don't know? You don't know, I guess I've won the debate, says everyone in our culture. I'm gonna go home and tell people that he doesn't know anything? Not only can you tell them that, but you may also say, as far as I'm concerned, I have not up until the present time encountered anyone who does know. Oh, snap. Socrates clapped back, didn't he? Whoa. Socrates just owned him with that epic response. Yeah, you can tell him I don't know. I've never met anyone who does. Ah! He's talking to Meno. That means Meno doesn't either. Ah! He's met Gorgias. Means Gorgias doesn't either. Oh my god! Epic! What then? Did you not encounter Gorgias when he was here in Athens? Oh my god! Meno got it! Oh, Meno's coping now. Meno's taking some copium. He can't cope with the epic clapback after he tried to diss Socrates and nail him. Socrates clapped back and now, Meno is butthurt. I did indeed. Got him again. Socrates, epic. Did it not appear to you at that time that he knew? I don't quite remember, oh Meno. That might be an even deeper disc if you recognize remembering is tied to real learning. The ideas of justice and beauty itself are recollections of what we once knew before we were born, according to the Phaedo. Theory of learning as remembering. Mentioned in the Phaedo, talked about a bit in the Phaedo. Anyway, he doesn't remember. In purple. So let's highlight it. It might be significant as we read. Let's highlight it. O Meno, so that at the present time, I'm unable to say how he appeared to me at the time. So, okay, so he's not going to keep beating up poor Meno when he's down. He did clap back epically, and he was owned. But he's not, he did drive him to the paint and dunk on him. But he's not going to keep going. He's just saying, I don't remember. So let's see where he goes, if he's going artfully. Oh, in chat. How does the interrogation of metaphysical inquiry, whoa, there's some big words in this question, epistemological framework, and ethical implications, let's break down this sentence into regular English. How does the integration, okay, the assimilation of metaphysical inquiry. Okay, so the wondering about the state of the realm of being, not the physical world. Epistemological frameworks. Okay, epistemological is fancy talk for how we think. We talk about beliefs, understanding, nous. Ethical implications. So again, how we use our knowledge. We're talking about art. If we use our mastery to benefit, is Socrates benefiting him, or is he just nailing him epically? Within philosophical discourse, shape our understanding of consciousness. Good question. How is all of this that our friend Help is showing a lot of cleverness to put into fancy words for us, which can be important because sometimes showing a legitimacy to other people, like, you can't do philosophy, you don't have big words. Well, yes, we have this guy. We have that one guy on chat who's saying the same things, but in fancy words. So, maybe take us seriously. So it can be fun. How does it shape our understanding of consciousness? Remember, we talked about this is a state of being or a state of self. It's not just a logical exercise. And to what extent can the synthesis, bringing it all together, bringing all of the things he mentioned into a unity, or, as we say in the dialectic, synthesis or analysis, bringing the definition of the subject, our metaphysical inquiry, our demonstration, how do we understand it, our division into our ethical use of it, how can we synthesize it? So a great example of a dialectic from that guy on chat, which is his name, I'm not being rude, a good demonstration of the dialectic. Can the synthesis illuminate the paradox? Oh, a question, paradox. We like questions. Of subjective experience, while simultaneously addressing the limitations. Okay, the paradox of subjective experience. So let's see, what's the paradox that he sees? While simultaneously addressing the limitations of rational thought in articulating the nature of reality. Wow, okay, so 2 questions I see here, if I get it right. Subjective experience. So our state of consciousness is while we're ensouled, there are many different souls that have subjective experiences. But if we're talking about there being a truth, it has to be objective. So in terms of reasoning or logos or understanding, dianoia, we talked about, well, opinions are subjective. You'll have the opinions based on your upbringing, the time of your birth, the culture, your family, most importantly, religious beliefs, all that kind of stuff. But the logos and dianoia, understanding with a capital U, is objective. Anyone can play. It's just the truth. That's why we're reading. Equally so, as we have a ladder, we have understanding, and we also have states of mind. Our states of mind, or our experience of consciousness itself, is subjective as individual souls, but if there is something called self-beauty in the honorific, it has to be universal. Anyone who has that experience is experiencing the same thing. So good question. The paradox is the question is the movement from our physical world of becoming, seeing through your physical senses, identifying yourself as a separate soul, to what's called in philosophy the hyparxis, the apex. We have some apexes before with the apex of the self, the apex of philosophy, the dialectic. But in terms of, and the Phaedo Socrates says, there's just like all of the ideas like self-beauty, self-justice, self-goodness, all of the things that we say exist in being. So they've been the subject of our dialectics so we can understand them. And we do the dialectic so we can experience them objectively and subjectively. So the two would become one. They all have their own hyparxis in ousia. Ousia is all of them all at once. So there's this movement from many to one, or as WHAAA is saying, subjectivity to objectivity. So that's what makes it truth. That's what makes it dianoia, or understanding, and not opinions. That's what makes it enlightenment and not just a crazy trip. These sorts of words that would diminish the experience. And that's what makes it truth. But the other part of the question is, how do you express it in rational thought? That's a good question. That's the big one. Good for you. How do we express all this? And how do we do it in an ethical way? Another good point. That's our question. How is Socrates communicating his experience of objective truth, which allows him to say not just what is virtue or excellence, what is self-virtue, what is it itself, objectively for everyone, and knowable, that's the word intelligible. Intelligible means both understanding and experience, which is why the whole reason we're doing dianoia is to trigger the experience of nous. And by the way, after we get it, can we use it artfully, ethically, to help someone? So that goes, these are our big questions. Good for you. Notice, this is another demonstration of why it's important to share our questions. He had, thank you. That guy on chat has articulated the same questions we've been talking about from a different perspective that can help us build our question or polish our question, or gives us a way of framing this question to academics or people who are familiar with this kind of language. So we benefit each other. So which itself might be a kind of virtue or a kind of ethical use of his metaphysical inquiry to articulate his rational thoughts and his level of vision of the nature of reality. His question might be, in some curious way, some mysterious way, an answer to the very question he's asking. There might be an answer within what he just did, which is pretty cool, but would only have come to light if he took the courage and had the language to share it.
I'm looking for someone to share in an adventure.
Which is why philosophy isn't a one-person game. WHAAA, do you think that even though you may or may not have limitations of your thinking, you articulated your question from your state of consciousness about metaphysics and ethical use of philosophy? Do you think you articulated it in a way that could benefit us and yourself? And would you think that is an example of ethical use of philosophical discourse? And even though we are two different people or many different people on the channel, so we have our subjective experiences, there is something universal in what you asked that we could all recognize or remember and be reminded of, and that could potentially benefit us. What is the logos? What is the limitations of rational thought? How far up does it go? Big question. One of the things that many spiritual traditions says, hey, that enlightenment experience, you can't talk about it. That's why we sit in silence. But that's literally all we talk about in philosophy. So they're wrong. They're mistaken. But there's a question, hang on a second, what's beyond that? What's beyond that which is the highest expression of rationality of the Logos? If the Logos is in being, which allows us to read about it in the Meno, use it to solve our problems in philosophical midwifery, use it to understand the system of the paradigm of music. These are all playlists we have on our channel. Therefore, it has to exist eternally in being, which means even being is rational. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to do any of these. But what's the cause of that? And is that beyond the limits of Logos? But if it causes intelligibility itself, then how can it be cause of it if it doesn't have it somehow within it? This is the hugest, this is one of the biggest questions of philosophy. That's the first hypothesis puzzle. What's beyond reality itself, or the cause of reality itself? And we were talking about the benefits of using reason to get to the realm of being, but also practicing it as a habit, a practice, like you're demonstrating right now, so that even when we're in that level of being, however we get there, and Socrates points out, by the way, everyone gets there when you die, depending on how well you've practiced and integrated the art of the Logos, depends on how long you're going to be there and where you go after. Do you reincarnate? Do you get trapped in that cycle, or do you go somewhere else? We've been talking about philosophy as the maybe most excellent spiritual tradition because we use the Logos to get there, and we practice asking questions in this kind of a way, so that even when we are in something that might be overwhelmingly beautiful, we have that under our belts as a way of being or an integration, so we can act in the most ethical or just way for ourselves to ask a question about where we are that might allow us to go beyond. That's what we're doing here. And we're taking all of that to our question, how is that involved with reading? Levels of question and sharing and things. How is this related to the Logos? How is the use of this for ourselves, talking to ourselves and to others, like Socrates is doing to Meno? How is that related to an art? How can we determine whether we've mastered that art? How do we know that we've gotten there? How is this related to excellence of being a human being? Is sharing these questions and investigating them together the best that we can do, the meaning of life. And by the way, can this be taught? So, in answer to your question, yes. Yes, good question. That's the question, that's where we are. Do I have an answer? Well, it's the question we're asking, so let's see what Socrates' answer is. I am in need of knowing this. But, what does he call it? But, oh friend, oh fellow traveler, let's travel together. So that's the answer to that. So I'm going to borrow Socrates' answer. Yes, we are also in need of asking these questions, answering them, knowing what exactly is self-excellence. Is that the highest level of reality or consciousness? And by the way, excellence isn't just experiencing it, but understanding it. And not just understanding it, but demonstrating it to benefit our friends and each other and ourselves and Meno here. So good thing that you asked. Helps us to remember. Socrates, I don't quite remember. So at the present time, I am unable to say how he appeared to me at the time. But perhaps he did know, and perhaps you know what he said. Therefore, please remind me what he said if you wish. Tell me yourself, for it appears beyond a doubt that you think just as he does. So Socrates is using whatever mastery that he has to judge he is keeping himself open and receptive, as we are, as our chatters are, sharing our questions, carrying them together, polishing them up nicely. Neither of us seems to know. Very Socratic, but we are journeying together. But maybe Meno is giving the appearance that he does know. Know what? Whether or not Gorgias knows. Does Gorgias, his teacher, know what virtue is? Socrates says, no. I haven't met anyone who does. Well, didn't you know Gorgias? Yep. Epic slam. But by the way, Socrates is able to recognize before the conversation even unfolds. So maybe that's part of using discourse and his cognitive or understanding frameworks to be ethical, to help him. You tell me, because it looks like you know or you think the way he does. And by the way, he's a teacher. So what's he doing teaching if he doesn't know? Or what kind of a teacher, maybe a different sort of a teacher than Socrates, who might be teaching while not claiming to know yet, but willing to go on the journey to reach it. Through what? Logos. How? The dialectic. So, demonstrating it to judge him, I don't remember. Ooh, what's remembering? The end of the dialectic. One of the purposes of dialectic is to remember that thing we're after in being, that thing which is objective. The noun, not the subjective adjective, a beautiful thing in our physical world, but the thing itself. I don't remember, so I can't say. Open to it, perhaps he did. Let's see, because it seems, without a doubt, that you think the way he does. So he can recognize the student, he can recognize the teacher, he can recognize the framework maybe, from his mannerisms, from how he's talking, the same way we are trying to do to Socrates, because Socrates is talking in a way that reflects the dialectic and the logos. That's why we are looking for the dialectic as we read. Socrates has it maybe, so he's judging. So, interesting epic slams and interesting use of Socrates' art. Where does he go from here? He's asking Meno to lay out what he thinks, what he thinks excellence is. He thinks he knows. He thinks he knows because he's a student of Gorgias. He thinks Gorgias knows, which might be why he started with the question, can it be taught? He didn't ask what it is. I already know what it is. Can it be taught? So he's asking Meno, you lay it out for me, son. Let's have a look. Fellow adventurer, let's go. What's he going to say? On that cliffhanger, let's call it a day for today. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you for following in chat. Feel free, if you're watching this on YouTube, to follow along on Twitch if you have Twitch, or subscribe on YouTube and you'll get notifications for our live streams if you want to play along live, which is really usually really fun. People's perspectives and ponderings and questions and insights usually brings more Aphrodite, brings more life and meaning to the text. It's a lot of fun. You can join our Discord. You get notifications on Discord when we're about to go live. And you have chats there and have conversations and things, which are a lot of fun. You can support on Patreon if you have the means and you think it's worth doing, if you think it would be excellent to do so. And you can find a free link to the text below. Thank you so much for joining. I hope you're puzzled and you have some of those questions with you under your belt. And I hope you bring them along to the next one. Thank you so much for joining.